Eventide is a post-apocalyptic horror setting that is published by Frenzy Kitty Games, was sent to me by Gareth Graham, the designer, and what intrigued me about it was the fact that there's a lone wanderer section, a way to play solo, and we'll take a look at that as we briefly look through this book. It attempts to do quite a bit. It attempts to create an entire world as well as give you a toolkit to create a world for yourself. The basic mechanic of the game itself is you are assembling a dice pool of d6s, and those are based on the various attributes you have in your stats and skills, like body, mind, combat, survival, persona, and then within those you have various skills, and if you are trained in those you can get a d6 add-on, and then you roll for a success or a failure against a difficulty level, and 5s and 6s in most rolls are successes. If you are completely untrained in whatever you're trying to do, only 6s are successes, and then you're rolling against a difficulty level to determine whether you succeeded or not. The game contains a hardcore variant which allows you to both create your character in a less advantageous way by only assigning 3 additional stat points in turn among your skills instead of 4, but also throughout the book there are these symbols that indicate modes of play that would make it a little bit more hardcore. We're not going to go through the entire details of everything. It's pretty standard if you're familiar with role-playing games in terms of outfitting and creating, buying things and such. It's post-apocalyptic, so you're going to possibly be traveling around with a group. It's called the Tribe in this rule set, and you have the instructions on how to create the tribe. And this is sort of pretty typical, I think, of what this rule set does, and the way it manages to accomplish so much is a lot of it is our narrative prompts. So where it says here, establish the drive, it's their core focus. There's some questions here. What are they about? Why do they keep going and stick together? What do they want to accomplish? There aren't tons of tables to guide you in if you wanted to have a sort of rich list of random tables to roll on to answer those questions. You just have to come up with that yourself, and that may be to people's liking or not, depending on what you're expecting to get here. It is a template, but it doesn't provide the necessarily detailed resources to develop things out within the material that's here. Here is what I mentioned about the rules in terms of making tests, assembling your dice pool, and rolling. And we have the chart here for the GM guideline for the difficulty level. And this is always useful to have, especially if you're doing solo work, because as you might expect, when you're rolling attack, you're using a combat skill plus a melee or a ranged, and the test difficulty is going to be equal to the defense of the opponent. So when you get into, this is the vampire beetle, the defense here is 2, so this would end up being the difficulty of getting a hit on that. There are quite a few enemies here, beasts of the world, in the book, and I like the fact, and they're listed here, it would have been nice to have, for the soloist at any rate, and this purports to be for the soloist because there is that little solo section. It would have been nice to have this numbered so that you could just roll on it if you wanted to get something random and not have to count down or make that up yourself. So I would have wanted that there. I like the fact that the enemies are presented in a pretty clean way in terms of there's not a lot of stats, but there's a little bit more description or narrative discussion about them. And I think particularly for solo play, or really any play, I think that is useful because it helps you place the enemy within the story and not just kind of appear, but it will give you some suggestions as to what their behavior might be or how they might be interacting with the environment when you came upon them. So that's really well done. There are some rules here for crafting if you want to try to make some things. It's a strange combination of detailed and abstract because things are, you just have this concept of metal, wood, stone, fiber, chemicals, and some formulas. Here's a table that will tell you if you want to make this, these are the things you need to collect. This is how long it takes. It gets pretty detailed here, whereas a lot of the rest of it is less detailed. So there's a GM section here describing the world, giving some advice here, and deciding when you're going to call for the roll, how to interpret the dice and award experience. Then we get into the indication of what the world is. And again, this is where there's a lot of potential here, and yet you would need to bring quite a bit to it because the detail is limited. So for example, there's religions in the world, and we have just a few sentences about the various religions, and the concept that there could be a religion or divine groupings or tribes is an interesting one, but you would have to bring it in and develop this much more on your own without the source material being done for you. And ditto for some of the areas here, ditto for the areas that are described here. So for example, here, we just have this description of one of the central districts. This is aristocratic, it's affluent, the powerful live and work, the buildings are less decayed. It's where the Hall of Justice is found, but that's kind of all you get. And there is a suggestion of maybe a plot hook here. The party is approached by someone who needs a rare and valuable item, stolen from one of the residences. The task will be difficult, but the rewards will be great. But there isn't, I'm not even sure there's a table for example, rolling up what that item might be. So to use this, you would need to be prepared to go outside of what is provided here. And there's quite a lot. I mean, the benefit is that we have like a coastal area here. There are Redland's Broth Pot is a top-rated stop for travelers passing through the tower. They serve delicious bone broth and are known for their low prices and generous portions. This is a nice little beginning of a story. And the Scar is a massive crater in the middle of the wasteland. It measures approximately 10 kilometers in radius and is almost perfectly circular. It's sketches of a world. I guess that's the best way to say it. And then there are scattered throughout the wastelands of the New World, there are existing tribes, and we get very basic descriptions of what the tribes are with some NPC members. So the Augmenters, for example, they revere remnants of the old world, and they tells you where they are, how many of them, and a couple of notable members. Again, the beginning of something that you could pick up and put into your story, but you would have to walk down a long road by yourself to get it into a story, and you would need to bring a lot more to the session than just what is here. And finally, I want to spend some time on this Lone Wanderer section. What is a solo game? A brief description of that. And it's telling you the key thing here is really a journal that you need. More on this later, because the solo rules here, such as they are really prompts to storytelling, written storytelling, and that you do follow many of the rules in terms of character setup and everything that is at the beginning that is in this rule set. But it says, now that you've created your wanderer, it's time to start laying the foundation for an adventure. And these are questions and prompts that you are to be thinking about, and I guess perhaps drawing from the material that's in this book or your own imagination to answer. So it says, like, who is involved in whatever your task is. You could flip through and decide that one of these tribal members is involved, or it involves one of going from one area to another, but you're not going to have a lot or really any random tables that are going to direct you in these manner. There are task categories that are discussed on page 235, which are here. So in terms of, as a solo story gamer, the task you initially set for your character is completely up to you. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 of them here. And again, I wonder, why couldn't there be 6 and numbered if you really want to do this randomly? A lot of solo gamers do like to have random prompts to start because they find, and I'm one of them, that it sort of sparks an imagination as opposed to reading and just deciding. There's a nice little flow chart here. You're going to frame your scene and describe and role play your events, look at your story trigger, and then decide whether you're acting with that what you need to do is a task or an oracle question. And the test level is here, and it's repeated. That difficulty level is repeated here. One thing that's nice is that if you're not sure of a difficulty level, you can roll some random d6 and sort of just get a level. So if it's going to be, well, let's say it's tricky, but I don't know exactly how tricky, you could roll a d6 and figure out, oh, it's only 3 tricky or it's 5 tricky in a random way. That's quite nice. There's a basic oracle here that you've probably seen in various versions elsewhere if you're doing solo work at all, and it's a d6 roll, and it will give you the likelihood of an outcome. And they explain a little bit what no and means. For example, the answer is no, and in addition, it's even worse all the way through. And there's a nice example here of how this actually would work in gameplay. It directs you also to the toolkit that is provided here. This is the extent of the random tables in the book. We have a name generator, this difficulty generator, which is really interesting and useful. I would probably rely on that quite a bit. Hit location table, you could generate vehicles, relationships among characters, PCs or NPCs, NPC demeanor, random resources. This is that salvage haul table. I think it was earlier in the book as well for crafting. How to generate settlements and tribes. And this is a way to create a new little map. So what you would do here is roll 2d6. This I actually liked a lot because it gave you the random with the prompt. So you roll 2d6, come up with an area, and then you'd roll on this d66 chart to decide what was there. And you could build out an entire map this way, actually, and create a whole little land with things like friendly tribes, enemy tribes, animals, villages, etc. And from this, go back and put in places and mission and where to go. If I was doing this solo, I would probably start here and I'd probably fill out an entire map and then work backward and figure out what of the tribes I was interested in, what of the places made sense to me, and then I would build out the story from there. So I would put an NPC in a place that made sense and then create a story using these prompts based around that. That's how I would do it. And it probably would actually end up being more like a narrative journal that way, and then roll and decide. Something would probably just emerge, but you could roll and decide what your actual mission and task was going to be. So I think for the soloist, this will work really well because it's like one book you need and your imagination. And if you're interested in or willing to do journaling in that way, that is how I would approach it. And I think if you're interested in doing post-apocalyptic something, for just having it in one volume, this would be a great place to go. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Ultimate RPG Game Master's World Building Guide. There are other books in this series. They are the Character Backstory Guide, there's a Micro RPG book, the Gameplay Guide. I've done videos on the character book and the Micro RPG. I think there's another one that I did a video on, can't remember, but not the Gameplay Guide. In any event, this is a book full of various tables. They're not all random tables because some of them are, as we'll see, laid out in a manner that's not simply rolling something to get a random value, but actually working through a decision-making process of priorities to come up with various backstories and things that will flesh out the world that your game is set in. And the book goes into a number of different genres of play, and I'm just going to show you a few things from each section. So there's a chapter on that's focused on fantasy, sci-fi, horror, X-punk, and then something that is called just neutral. Moving into the chapter on fantasy, all of the chapters start with questions that are indicated to roll a d20 for every player in your group, including yourself. And what's interesting about this, I just got a question on the channel from somebody about, did I know about any games that were explicitly co-op, meaning that they were meant to be played sort of with everybody as the player and everybody as the GM. And of course, this isn't a game, it's a supplement, but the concept here of asking everybody around the table to contribute to, in this case, it's questions about, is magic present in the world? What major event in this world's history is remembered largely inaccurately? How long do people have to travel distances? What is considered rare and valuable? It's a shared world building, and this book contains a list of questions like that for every chapter and therefore every theme of the book. Moving into the end of this section on fantasy is something that I want to point to you, because this is also throughout the book, this priority system of creating information and story and backstory about a place. So in this case, it says, not every place in the world is a grand metropolis, legendary stronghold, or sacred ruin. However, even in small places, there is magic and wonder. Use the priority system below to create an interesting place that might otherwise be lost and unappreciated. So what you're meant to do in these 5 areas of beauty, culture, amenities, wisdom, and secrets is to assign priorities of 1 to 5 for each category, but you're not allowed to repeat a number. So what that means in essence is the listings under each category go from making something extremely significant, like the beauty of this place is so singular it is unmatched on the planet, down to, if you assigned it value 5, it's the most offensively ugly planet in the world, place in the world. So as you are going through these prompts, looking at the different types of amenities that are offered or the wisdom that is there, you have to, not everything can be equally important or equally pleasing. And this priority system, as I said, is throughout the book, and I think it's very effective in helping you shape a world in a multifaceted way, where the temptation might be to make everything as significant, everything as good, everything as interesting, and that's not always the case, as we know. Into the sci-fi area, again, starting with the D20 list of questions. How far have people made it into space? Are there humans in the world? Are there new forms of perception and sensory experience? Decks of cards are used also in this book here to enable selection and therefore world building and narrative building. Here, what you're doing is creating something that is understanding how a technology has developed to change the world. So, for example, you would pick a random card here, the Ace of Diamonds, and that would bring you to the area that this impacted. In this case, it was transportation. So it was a new publicly accessible mass transit solution. And then if you chose again, we have a 7 of clubs. The next section is to do with how it changed exactly. So there's a little error here. They forgot to put the suits here in the categories, but what this means is it changed our transportation did something about politics, and I can't remember what number I got, but I think it was a 7. Becomes the subject of heated disagreement between 2 influential political factions. So if you were doing a sci-fi setting and you wanted to base it upon that, perhaps your entire setting could be something to do with two types of, say, space stations and a new way of getting between one or the other of them and the impact that that had. And that could be the kind of foundational structure for your story. Moving on to the horror section. Again, the list of 20 questions collaboratively answered. What forces outside the PC's control bind them to this place? How is the horror personally tied to at least one of the PCs? Why would well-meaning people take steps to conceal vital information? Thematic, and probably could be brought actually into other types of sessions, not just horror related, but they are thematic to what is being discussed here. Here it walks you through a way, for example, to create your own horror monster and use giving you aspects that you can think about in terms of its nature, appearance, violence, and vulnerabilities, and how you put all those parts together. This is more or less of a random table. It gives you a little more detailed, like how does the monster threaten violence? By sound, sight, smell, or feeling. When does it threaten violence? What does it do when it is indicating it's going to be violent? What type of vulnerability does it have? There's a priority system here for building an interesting conspiracy for your horror story. You can determine the size, influence, ideological danger, supernatural connection, and dedication to of that conspiracy, again, where some is more important. So the size, if it's such a massive organization, it feels like there are more people involved than not involved. That's very different than it's a small conspiracy. So the choices here, as you knit them together with other choices that you need to make, will form a backstory for you. Whether, for example, it has access to magic, or how much access to the supernatural or magic the organization has, and how dedicated are the people to the organization. So are you creating a thing where people are fanatical, or they're just kind of maybe opportunistic in terms of their participation in this? There's a use of poker deck cards for finding a body, and this is pretty cool. So the red cards are going to give you information about the victim, and the hearts are going to provide insights into their personality and emotions, and the diamonds are going to be physical evidence, and then the black cards are going to be information about the killer. And so the spades will be about motivations, and the clubs are going to be about the killer's body, abilities, possessions, or location. So using the cards this way, you have your prompts, and then you can just pull in this. So a four of spades, what that's going to mean is that this is going to be something about the killer's motivation. And what is that thing? There's evidence of an injury. So perhaps the killer, him or herself, had been the victim of a trauma, and maybe that's motivating the crime. And then you would continue on pulling in another card. So the Queen of Hearts, this has to do with the victim's personality, and it says there is something here someone was trying to keep hidden. For some reason, they were not able to conceal it, and that's the victim. So the killer has been injured, and the victim is trying to hide something, and that starts to provide you with a through line of a story to create, well, they're saying a crime scene, but it could actually be the way to create a mystery. I think that would be a good way to use it. It's often difficult if you're trying to, especially soloing, if you're trying to play out a session that has like a mysterious or discovery aspect to it, for obvious reasons as a soloist, but I think this could help a lot with that. Moving into the X-Punk, we have a discussion here of sort of what X-Punk is, and it's defined here as basically someone against the world, explores stories about resisting oppression, often set in dystopian worlds, and the now familiar D20 listing that each player around the table is meant to contribute to. How long ago did the oppressors rise to power? Does anyone live outside the system of oppression? And if so, who is that? Do people modify their bodies? If so, and how? And it says there's two essential elements in every punk story: resistance and then style. And they're giving you here some subgenres that will explain to you the stylist and the aesthetic elements and the thematic elements of them. So if you're doing steampunk as opposed to necropunk or cyberpunk, dungeon punk, apocalyptic punk, and the thematic elements. So if you're looking at something apocalyptic punk, you're talking about the breakdown of society as one of the themes. If it's necropunk, it's death versus immortality, or diesel punk, unions versus corporate authority. There's lawlessness in the wasteland. So there's really a lot here that can help you sketch out your own world in just such a variety of ways. Moving on to the last section, the neutral section, I wanted to show you the sort of general concepts of like a big baddie. So there is aspects, again, the priority system, to figuring out it's in areas of cunning, strength, influence, plan, and corruption, and assigning various priorities to them. Like the strength, is it a cosmic threat, all the way down to they're not much of a threat at all, and they require external resources to be a threat. So a lot of variety there. Ditto with the influence and the plan that they have. But putting all this together will give you some backstory, which is what you're looking for here in a sort of generic kind of way. Ditto for, it says, powerful super weapons and impenetrable fortresses make excellent set pieces for climactic action. So here are ways to choose some vulnerabilities for every strength that your super weapon or fortress possesses, and then choosing some vulnerabilities for it to flesh it out and make it more three-dimensional. And then at the end, I found this to be extremely useful. This has to do with NPCs in a bar. And it says, we've broken down NPC attitudes into 4 categories: friendly, unfriendly, hapless. They're sort of a perfect victim to taunt or lure into trouble, or mysterious. And again, you're drawing a card, and then you're referring to the table here. For some reason, these tables go backwards. I'm not really sure what that is. It's counterintuitive to me, but you're referring to the table here. So this NPC or bar patron is going to be unfriendly. He's going to be a loudmouth braggart with more money than sense and more pride than skill. Or this one is going to be, he's also, this in the hapless, extremely accomplished in a field that is important to one of the PCs. Well, that doesn't really actually match with hapless, so not sure about that. But I like this a lot, because I'm always struggling in my sessions to have a rich way of coming up with a variety of NPC reactions, and I like this concept a lot of using a deck of cards with the 4 categories. And you can maybe expect to see some hacking up of this in a future video of mine. I'm not sure these would be my categories, and I'm not sure I would place them into a bar per se, but this is really useful in terms of just giving a wide range of options. So that is a look inside the Ultimate RPG Game Master's World Building Guide. There really is, as with all of these books, there's a ton of material here that if you were setting out to really create something starting with a blank page, this would be an excellent way to start and have at your side at the beginning, and really take you far into the development of a world. And the next thing I have to show you is Mothership. I'm coming late to this. You've probably heard about it already. It seems to be the sort of sci-fi horror RPG of the moment. I just got my copy after I bought this a little while ago, and I also bought Dead Planet, but I don't have the physical copy of Dead Planet yet. This is it's a sci-fi horror RPG, and it is a D100 system. So you're rolling under a D100 stat for pretty much everything. And I really like that mechanic, that way of using dice, because it's just easier for me to conceptualize the chances of something or the ability that I have when it is in that form. The book is pretty dense in the sense of the format is small and there's just quite a lot. This is, for example, an example of the character sheet. And for my eyesight, this is a little tight. I did print out full-size character sheets, but even at full size, it's pretty tight here. What's great about the character sheet is it sort of works as a flow chart, so you can, and all the instructions for rolling are on here. So you can go to point 1, you roll 60-10 for each of your stats there, and then you move on to point 2, picking your class, Teamster, Android Scientist, or Marine, and we can look at what those are. It gives you some starting save values, and then based on your class, if you say you're playing an Android, you get to add 5 to your speed and your intellect, so you can adjust the stat that way. And then you move on to point 3 to get your skills, and it tells you, so say we're still an Android, we get to assign some skills into computers, mathematics, or linguistics. We get +2 points, and it explains how much each of the aspects cost. And it's like a flow chart. So for example, they say in the book, like, consider an expert is like somebody with a PhD in that area. The master is somebody who's like absolutely exceptional, maybe like an Albert Einstein, or trained. And then that will allow you to add that percentage onto the relevant role. So for example, if we have 2 points as an Android to assign, experts cost 2 points. So we could decide to be an expert in something, but we need first to have attained the skill of trained. So there's a connection point there. So as you would expect, you can't become expert unless you're trained first. So we could, if we gave 1 point to mathematics, we can look forward to see what we could ultimately train up in being. And then you move on to the 4th thing, take note of how your class deals with stress and panic. We'll talk about that in a minute, and it explains that. So stress and panic is something that you would expect would be in this type of setting, which is sort of like an alien movie type setting where you're in a inherently stressful situation and you are measuring your stress during the course of the game. You're accruing stress points, and at certain moments you need to do a panic check, and the higher your stress is, the more chances you have of going to panic mode, where you then need to roll on this table and get an impact of the panic. And rolling on this table, you also have to add your stress value. So that is increasing pressure as things happen in the game. What's cool about it is that the various classes have different ways of either having or not having stress. So if you're the Teamster class, which is sort of somebody who's like maybe cooler under pressure, if you get to the panic effect, you get to roll again and maybe make a choice of how you panic. Or if you're the scientist and you are failing a certain type of save, everybody around you gets stressed because they're like looking to you to be the logical one, to not respond in a way, a failure of a sanity way. So it's kind of, it carries that stress mechanic through to the class, or I should say the class you are impacts even that stress mechanic. And I like that quite a bit. There are starting loadouts here that you can choose. They're thematic for you. So this is in essence, you're choosing your equipment. And I like it when you're given a theme for your equipment, because oftentimes I just find myself like, well, I'll take a rope or whatever. And I'm doing that just because I feel like I should, or I've done that in the past, or that seems to be the expectation. But here you can have things that focus on exploration or extermination. Again, in many of these sessions, you're going to be exploring like a derelict ship or something of that nature. So There's 4 different types of saves in the game. Sanity, as we talked about with the scientist, your ability to explain away logical inconsistencies in the universe, so you can see if the scientist is going to fail that, why other people might panic. Again, very, very thematic and nicely done. Fear, how well you can cope with emotional trauma, not only fear, but loneliness, depression, or any other emotional surge. Body is your reflexes, and armor is resistance to damage. Then, as you would expect in terms of being a space game, under survival, there are checks for crisis, food and water, oxygen, and this is ways to earn credits in the game. And you can get a job, and there's a D10 table there for rolling on that. Everything is either D100 or D10 in the game, I think. I'm pretty sure absolutely everything is. Combat section here laid out really nicely. Overall, the layout of this is very effective because every single page or every spread is focused on one particular topic, so you don't have to flip around. And the section of the rule 12.1, all the 12 rules are on page 12, etc. So that's quite useful. Combat guns laid out here and explanations of their particular benefits, along with a little diagram as to where on the gun that benefit is. The art in the book is really excellent. It's not on every page, or maybe it's on, well, no, it's not on every page because there's so much text here, but it's really nicely interspersed. It's selectively done, but I think for such a densely printed text page, the use of shading, the use of bolds, columns, all the things that signal the reader to kind of help out is really very effectively done. These are the different types of suits that you could be wearing. Here's your equipment page, and again, these are referenced in the loadouts here that you can choose during character creation, wherever they were. So for example, if you wondered what a vibachette was in your exploration loadout, you could find here it's a machete that vibrates at ultra high speeds in order to cut cleanly through dense foliage. It can be used as a weapon. Or your vac suit, we saw the vac suits here in this section here. It gives you a plus 7% on an armor save. It's the basic suit worn while exploring in space, and it gives you some further information about its functionality. We have a D100 trinket table, something that I love and use in all of my games when I'm creating characters, giving them something to carry. And we also have here another aspect of trinkets, which is D100 patches. So it says that you can get a random patch sewn onto your clothing or gear. They don't have any mechanical significance, but they give you insight into your character. This is a really thematic way of giving a quirk or a hint at a backstory to a character, and I think would go far into differentiating your team. There's a capacity to hire mercenaries here, and you're given pretty basic information about them, but enough stats to have them come into play. And of course, the main thing is how much you have to advance and the salary that you need to pay them, and then of course the skills that they come with and the benefits that they have for you. And there's a D100 table here for the motivations of your mercenaries, and then these are archetypes or scum that you could hire, just kind of desperate people that maybe not super desirable, but they are 100 credits and have a salary of 200, which is considerably less than the salaries of the actual mercenaries, and they will offer you potentially some benefits. We talked about stress already and the panic effect. Again, this is a pressure system to give increasing desperation and feel to the characters, and could come into play not only with an enemy encounter, but just something that happened. If you were trying to fix a part of your ship that went wrong or whatever, you would then roll for that. There's rules for space travel, hyperspace, how long things take. There's a very detailed and, again, also quite dense, even if you print it larger as I did, way to create your own ship. And what's cool about this, it's also like a flow chart. So it takes you through various modules and tells you what's required. So for example, you must have a life support module, and it explains how you choose that, and then you're assigning values to all of these different things. You can select your secondary modules. Then there's calculations that you do. Again, it's pretty small even in this letter size printout, but that also could just be my eyesight, but to me, this is pretty small. However, what's really cool is based on all of the stats that you fill in here, and the actual book gives you an example of what these look like, filled in with number values that you are using based on instructions that you're given. You then take all of this and it gets added up into it. This is the one sort of strange layout because this is supposed to be connected, but this is the explanation of what this is and how to do it. You then add it up and you will get what the values are for your armor, your combat value, the intellect of the ship, and the speed of the ship, the maximum hull. All of this is represented by the details here. I should say all of this represents the summation of these individual details here and what there is. And the example here will give you also a diagram of the ship. And this is really cool. I've talked about this in other contexts, and I still have. I have obtained the original Traveler, and I plan to go through that on the channel at some point. And I've talked about in various videos and podcasts I've been on, even that I almost feel like I just want to do a session just building a ship. That's it. And I think that and then sort of thinking about the implications of my ship and how it came to be. And maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that here using this and not Traveler. I don't know. I like the concept a lot. For myself, playing solo, like I'm never going to do ship-to-ship combat, for example. That's just not going to happen. However, this is cool here. Again, speaking as a soloist, this is a D100 table for the critical hit effect table. If I was going to do a session with Mothership, and I probably will on the channel in some future video, I might likely even start here. Maybe I would create my ship and think about what that meant and give myself, basically put my ship into peril so that this could be the inciting incident of my whole session. And even if I didn't actually build the ship and it was just like abstracted, like we're on a ship or I'm on a ship or whatever, this is what we're dealing with. So my system has been overloaded and nothing is working. And that's the beginning of the story. Or my navigation is off. I can't control where I'm going. And that's the beginning of my story. So I find this very helpful to have here. Rules on experience. And again, what I love about the experience is that you have it broken down into, you get 10 experience if you just get through a session, and then you have specific goals and what those experience for everybody, what those experience points are worth. However, there's also this optional rule, which I would definitely use, where you have experience assigned based on the class. So Marines are going to get extra experience if they kill someone, and scientists are going to get extra experience if they bring a piece of alien tech or a living organism aboard the ship for study. Very thematic and super helpful, I think, in order to differentiate the characters and to have rules just have impact throughout the game, so that, like with the fear and stress, this is differentiated based on the class. And it explains to you what you can do when you level up. I won't get into that. Here is the sheet for the ship creation, as I mentioned, and you can see it's double-sided. So these individual stats carry through into the bigger session, and we have the character sheet here in the back of the book, and then the booklet on the back has a player's cheat sheet, which I've also printed out somewhere, I think bigger, because again, this is pretty tight for me, but it is useful to have right there on the back. You can flip it over. And that is a look in Mothership. I also got this one shot, a one shot, but I'm waiting for my the Dead Planet module that I just bought to arrive. And as I said, most likely you're going to see this on the channel somewhere in the future. So that's a look inside Mothership, the sci-fi horror RPG. I don't think there could be any better way to finish up this video than show you The Waking of Willoughby Hall by Ben Milton. This demonstrates just the incredible range of creativity in this world that we are occupying here with independently produced RPGs. And here's a look at the front and back cover of this one shot. This is showing you this giant that has awoken and is terrorizing the outside of this mansion that the characters are in. And just seeing this photo sort of gives a sense of the lightness of the flavor here. It is a one shot that it says it's, I read elsewhere that he said he specifically keyed it toward Knave, but it doesn't actually, I don't think it actually says that in here anywhere. It simply just says like it's OSR, you know, you can do it with lots of things. And I think I may play, I plan a video for you on Five Torches Deep, which we'll look at in like 1 second. I think I'm going to do this together. I don't know. Anyway, I bought this because I had to. As you know, I like Ben Milton's work quite a bit as a designer. I've done and talked about Knave quite a bit and Maze Rats, and I think for these materials that he produces are not solo. They are for traditional RPG play. However, there's a sensibility in all of them that I think just makes them very easy to utilize as a soloist. And we look here at the credits of this. And what this is it's a little story here, and it says that there are, yesterday, 3 adventurers, not you, but 3 adventurers were infiltrating the flying castle of Bonebreaker Tom, a cloud giant. And then this morning they stole into the giant's deepest dungeon and purloined his goose, Mildred, who, rumor has it, lays golden eggs. But the goose has other ideas. As they crept out, the goose began honking furiously, and here's Mildred honking on the back, rousing the sleeping giant, who thundered through the castle toward the would-be thieves. The party leapt from the cloud, the wizard breaking their fall at the last moment with a spell of featherfall. Behind them, Bonebreaker Tom crashed to earth like a meteor, unscathed and enraged. He chased the desperate crew into the nearby town of Turnip Hill, where they tried to hold him off, much to the dismay of the town's citizens. During the battle, Tom ripped the bell from the tower of the local church and began swinging it like a flail, forcing the party to flee once more along the path into a nearby wood. And then, just moments ago, the exhausted adventurers reached the crumbling carcass of Willoughby Hall, an abandoned estate with an evil reputation. They have hidden themselves inside, hoping against hope for rescue as the giant rages outside. And it says, The Waking of Willoughby Hall is an adventure for old-school fantasy RPG sets in a haunted house, best suited for PCs of approximately 3rd level, and it assumes rules where PCs gain experience for treasure. In the tradition of old-school role-playing, the adventure does not have a plot, in quotes. I find that amusing because it totally has a plot, and the plot is that you're coming to rescue these adventurers, and I think that's great. The Waking of Willoughby Hall has 2 unusual features, the rampaging giant Bonebreaker Tom and an environment that escalates in danger over time. So the conceit here is that Bonebreaker Tom spends the whole adventure trying to track down the people who stole his goose by peering through the manor's windows, and you can see him doing that here. And there are rules here for determining where he is and what's going on. It says, as he swings his bell that he has, the cursed manor writhes in agony at the sound. Encounters become more dangerous as the manor wakes. And although the undead will not approach the bell or its wielder, intruders are fair game. So you're like in an alive haunted house here, yet there's a obviously there's, or not obviously, but to me there is a lightness of this. This seems suitable for example, for a play with children. It's not grotesque horror. It is, I don't want to say Disney horror, but I think of that, like animated candlesticks and things of that nature, in a more Disney-esque way than in something that is horror. So you have rules here for every 10 minutes of in-game time, or when the PCs cause a lot of noise, you're going to roll on an encounter die, and then something is going to happen. And over time, the Willoughby Hall is going to become restless, and it tells you what this means as that occurs, as the time passes. And then after all of this happens, the Willoughby Hall is purged of its evil. All supernatural effects and monsters vanish or turn to dust. And I guess that's kind of like the end. So in a way, it ends quietly, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but maybe that's better than having everything just explode in a kind of horrific manner, again, akin to this sort of okay for kids kind of presentation. You have some information here about how you get in and out of the manor, some information about how you can convert stats from other rule sets that you may be using. D20 lists of encounters of various sorts, so sleeping, restless, or awake encounters. And here are the stats for Bonebreaker Tom, and you can see, I mean, he's got 72 HP and an armor of 12, and so I don't know, and 12 hit die. I'm not sure that you are really meant to try to kill him, but there is an explanation here of the various things that he does, and he has a want. He wants his goose back. So you could create a scenario where you are trying to actually ultimately help him, even as he's kind of staring in at you and sort of possibly scaring you. There are some stats here for NPCs that you would find in here: the Death Knight, Skeletal Servants, and here are the Ghostly Footmen, for example. And the art here and the layout is just, it's very inviting, and it makes it feel doable, I think, for creating just this, getting into this whole world. And here's Mildred with her egg. Beginning of the book serves as both a map as well as a table of contents, because you're given the page numbers for the description of the room, and that's really clever and also quite useful. So you can turn to, say we're starting in the inner sanctum, you know exactly where it is. And then when you get to the description of the page, you have a reproduction of this portion of the map and an indication of where you can go from there. So the things that are not grayed out in the map are the things that are described on this page spread. And again, very useful and intuitive in terms of following this around and staying within the logistical confines of what has been designed for you for this. This just looks to me like it strikes the right balance of lightness and things to do and ways to interact with the environment that aren't necessarily simply combat based. I think for the soloist this is cool, and this was totally an impulse buy for me because I like the cover. I like Ben Milton's work, and I think it could really work in that there's a lot of just, even here, the night garden, every surface is covered in fungus. Just thinking about this and envisioning it, and then starting to investigate, well, I might need to bring in some other materials to, if I'm going to do some investigation in the fungus area, for example, what am I going to find? Because this is not going to provide, in this format, nor could it provide you with all of that. But I'm really looking forward to this, and I as I said, it was a total impulse buy, but when I got it, I was thinking I'm already planning a video on Five Torches Deep, and I'm not going to get too detailed into it right here, but we will just quickly look at what is this. Five Torches Deep strips 5e to its skeleton and fleshes it out with OSR elements. The goal is to provide an old school experience to those familiar with 5e. It's self-contained and playable as is, assuming familiarity with fantasy RPGs, and indeed that is the case here. The core mechanic is basically rolling with your d20 plus your relevant modifiers and comparing it to the DC. a default DC of 11 here. And you are given 4 races: human, dwarf, elf, and halfling. I think if I'm bringing this into, if I'm using this for Willoughby, I think I want to bring some characters in that sort of fit with this theme, like maybe a gnome or something. I don't know. I'm going to have to probably do some modification here off of these basics. But I think that's the way that I'm going to go and how I'm going to do this 5 Torches Deep video when I get to it, which will be relatively soon. So that is a look inside some of the RPG material that I've got active in the Geek Gamer's office. And again, just going through all of these various things, the level of creativity and the range of creativity and presentation is a testament to the aliveness of this creative genre. And I hope you enjoyed a look inside all of this material.